All right, evening everyone. So my name's Sean Sankey. My wife is called Helen. Helen's from the Northeast. Helen is currently at home looking after this little bundle of beauty, our little 5-week-old daughter called Phoebe. Nothing to do with the presentation, I'm just a very proud dad at the minute, so sharing baby pics where I can. Helen, she's a bit of a warrior of a woman. She's a really strong woman. She's originally from the Northeast. If anyone from the Northeast? Anyone from Newcastle, Durham? No? Okay. I'll be a bit offensive about the Northeast tonight, so that's probably a good thing. So she's originally from the Northeast, and we sometimes talk about if we weren't in Manchester, where would we want to live? I don't know if you talk about that with your spouse. With your spouse? If you've got a scouse spouse, that's even better. They're the best kind. If you talk about it with your spouse as to where would you live if you weren't here, right? And we say, you know, obviously we fantasize like, I'd love to live in Copenhagen actually for a little bit. We've spent some time out there, fantastic city, you know, maybe have a spell in Australia. But if we were going to move anywhere in this country, we'd probably go to Newcastle. Reason she's got family back up there, but I actually went to university there. So when I was 19 and making decisions about where I wanted to be somewhere that was cheap, that was fun, and that had loads of character. So clearly went up to Newcastle, where there is loads of banter, loads of beer, and loads of blue people just walking around on a Friday night because it's against the law to wear a jacket up there, but it's freezing. You ever been on a night out in Newcastle? You know that thing? Yeah? It's like the ice walk has originated in Newcastle, I'm sure of it. I had a great couple of years, and then after graduating, did a classic thing of getting a couple of different jobs. So I worked in a call centre dealing with complaints from grumpy people. Worked on the doors in the evening, dealing with drunk dickhead Geordies. And then worked through the week as a coach for a female basketball team with really aggressive, hyper-competitive Geordie women. So it was almost like it was this year-long masterclass in conflict resolution, just like through all these different angles, how to manage aggressive behavior from lots of different angles. And then my first real grown-up job after doing those three things was going and working for a finance company. So I got like a proper grown-up job on a graduate scheme, the kind of thing that you should get after you graduate. And did 5 years where I learned a lot about kind of management and change, and you know, was on projects over in India and back in the UK and stuff. But that was all very nice. But after about 5 years, I did a little bit of personal development stuff. And I was just like, you know what, I don't really just want to kind of climb the rungs of, you know, a nice but somewhat cushy, kind of stuffy finance corporate blue chip career. So it took a bit of a leap. And didn't have anything else to go to, didn't have a job, didn't have any savings or anything, but I was just like, you know, kind of feel the fear and do it anyway. I'd been listening to too many American motivational speakers, I think. And just kind of said, right, I'm just going to go make something different happen. So for about 6 months, tried different things, got lots of different rejections, but I ended up getting a job with a global consultancy. And then this is where I really kind of learned a lot about what conflict resolution really looked like. Because you need to know conflict resolution when you get into boardroom settings. And when you're really trying to influence powerful people, and particularly when you're trying to sell stuff. And so for about 5 years, I was working for this company, and this was where I really cut my teeth on how do decisions get made? How do people buy big projects? Yeah? How do you go about selling to really influential folk? It didn't come naturally to us, though. I remember the first pitch I was ever part of, and there was me and one of the partners, and we were pitching to I think it was RBS or Lloyds, it was one of the big banks, for a marketing project. And we were pitching to, not quite board, but like 2 levels beneath board. And I had like a responsibility for about a 10-minute slot in the middle of this pitch. And no one had ever trained us on, you know, doing sales or how do you pitch well or anything like that. So I did what any 25-year-old does at the time and just watched a couple of YouTube clips. And I ended up getting in front of these senior decision makers at this UK bank and started off by saying, do you want to earn more money next year? Well, I've got good news for you. And I could see out the corner of my eye, the partner that I was pitching with, she gave me a look as if I just sicked on her kids. She was just like, what is wrong with you? That is not how you pitch and influence senior people. There we go, that's all right. But that did kick off a 5-year mentoring relationship with that partner, and lots of other training, lots of other lessons, and lots of other experiences, which helped me learn, okay, how do you influence in a more elegant way when you're pitching to big buyers? So I did that for a little while, but then just thought, you know what, like living in a suitcase is great. I was all over Europe and that, and just kind of got sick of hotels and airports. I'm sure some of you kind of have had that kind of lifestyle for a little while. And I was like, you know what, this is nonsense. I'm never going to have a family if I'm like always kind of in different places. So I'm going to do it again. So quit again, didn't have anything to go to. I thought, oh, flipping heck, a little bit of a pattern emerging. And I ended up setting up my own gig. So I was working with different creative and tech companies, helping them think about, okay, how can you sell to bigger clients? How can you create more retained revenues? How can you do stuff in a bit more of a strategic way, but a way that still honors why you set up the business in the first place, yeah? And retain some of that creative heart, as well as doing something that's commercially rewarding. So I did that for a while, and then co-founded Form a couple of years ago with a co-founder at Mando, who some of you might know was a big digital agency over in Liverpool, because I was there for a little while helping them as a business, and that's where we won accounts like Shop Direct and Vodafone and TalkTalk, and just really started to try and get some big brands under the belt. And so what we've done is we've tried to kind of package up all the different learning of how to do that stuff and pass it on to creative companies, and that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. And what's interesting, as I kind of reflect on my own story, is that there is a bit of a through line across all of those different chapters, whether it was working on a door, working in a call center, being in a corporate setting, working with creatives. And actually that through line is thinking about how people think and thinking about how folk make decisions. Because how folk make decisions is really the fundamental of what it is to be human. We are choice-making machines, right? And I don't know about you, but I find it really fascinating to get into that stuff. We're at a really interesting place in history where we've got these fields of neuroscience and behavioral economics and all these podcasts that are helping us understand like how the brain works. It's only been 20 years that we've had CAT scanners and MRI scanners, and we can really understand the physics as well as the philosophy of what's happening when we're making choices. And what's really interesting is inside it all, and something that excited me throughout that whole journey, is this idea of story. Yeah? That story really accounts for a huge amount of how we process the world, and therefore how we make decisions, and therefore how the people that we're trying to sell to make decisions. I don't know about you, but I'm a sucker for a proper good story. If you like stories, you kind of enjoy film, art, literature. A lot of you build stories for your clients, right? Yeah, if those of you are in marketing, you're creating brand stories. If those of you who are filmmakers or PR agencies, you're always crafting a story, okay? And yes, I'm 6'4", and yes, I'm an ex-bouncer, but I'm an absolute weeper when you put me in front of a story like Pixar's Inside Out, which me and Helen went to see at the pictures. And I'm there in that scene where Bing Bong is sacrificing himself so that Joy can get back to save Riley, weeping like a hungry baby. And she's poking me going, what is wrong with you? As we're surrounded by 10-year-olds. But it's because good stories move us in ways that other types of communication and other ways of influencing just don't. Stories really are the key, and leveraging story in how you communicate if you're going to sell or influence in a compelling way. That's the case that I want to make tonight. Now, as I say, there's loads of science that's now just starting to emerge that begins to back this up. Some of you might have read a couple of these books, okay? But things that we've always intuitively known, we're now starting to get language for, right? About why stories really kind of impact us the way that they do, and how to use those insights, yeah, to craft how we communicate, whether we're trying to influence at a meeting, whether we're networking at something like this, whether we're at Prolific North next week and we're trying to make connections, whether you've got a formal pitch situation. Yeah? What are the best ways to communicate? Well, with the research that's out there now, there's no excuse for not knowing some of that stuff and being very intentional about how you communicate. And what I want to do tonight is just distill some of the best of what I've learned and pass it on to you, hopefully, so that you can communicate better stories and hopefully get a better premium for your business in justifying the work that you do, okay? So that's what I'm going to do. Now, 3 trends. And by the way, we're going to send you all these slides, so you'll get all these slides and a video of this tomorrow, so you don't need to be taking photos now. You'll just get them all for free. 3 trends to be aware of, and none of these will be a surprise to you, okay? Number 1 is noise and information overload. Okay, we all suffer with this, don't we? Yeah, and we know all the stats about how, if you live in a big city, you're probably subject to about 250,000 marketing messages a day, which is mental. Yeah? If anyone ever feels exhausted when you're going through London, it's mostly because you're going down the tubes and you're just being hit with those posters, yeah, every 2 or 3 seconds. We're bombarded with information now in a way that humans have never been bombarded with information. Yeah? The second thing that we need to talk about or need to understand is we live in a world which is increasingly multicultural, which is increasingly socially mobile and increasingly digital. Now, one of the unintended consequences of all of that is actually what the research has shown is that networks and relationships are starting to fragment. Yeah? People are moving around. They don't have the family connections they had anymore. You know, people are going through multiple versions of a family. Yeah? They don't stay in one place for very long. Yeah? Networks and relationships are much more fragmented in 2018 than they were 50 years ago. Okay? And because of those two things, and lots of other stuff that we could talk about, the general trend, particularly in the West, is towards diminishing trust. Okay? We're not as ready to trust people as we were a generation or two ago. And they're just trends that people like you and me, we can't fight, but we need to take account of and think of, well, okay, if this is the world that we're in, how do we tailor how we work in light of those trends? Well, there's three insights that come out of a lot of the neuroscience and a lot of how we understand the brain works, which I think relate to this and relate to how you go about talking about what you do, right? And the first one is narrative processing. All right, what does this mean? It means all of us, if you're breathing, if you're a human being, you make sense of the world through narrative. Yeah? We all, in a sense, are every day compositing our experience into the story that has come before and the story that we want to write. Yeah? All of us have got an idea of what it means for us to be the ideal hero in that story. Yeah? We all wake up in the morning and mostly subconsciously, sometimes intentionally, but mostly subconsciously, you and me, we've got an idea as to what it is to be the ideal dad, CEO, creative director, community volunteer, church leader, whatever it is, whatever you tag into your identity, you have a mostly subconscious idea as to what it is that makes you look like the hero in that world. Because we're constantly creating a story about what our life is. And the third thing is the amygdala. Anyone heard of the amygdala or know what the amygdala is? Okay, who wants to give me a quick thing of what the amygdala is?
Caveman, isn't it?
Go on.
The inner caveman, isn't it? It's the bit that...
The inner caveman.
To fight off.
The mind monkeys, the little fight or flight. It's this little almond-sized piece of your brain, which is at the back here. Hey, Steph. Which is the back of your brain here. And it's the most primal part of our brain. It's about the size of an almond. And it's the part through which every subconscious and conscious signal flows. Nothing gets through to your more conscious processing parts of the brain if it doesn't flow through the amygdala. And it only has one function, right, to filter out risk. That's all it does. It's scanning your environment 7 times a second to filter out risk. And it's looking for two things: immediate threats to life and stuff that's going to make me burn more calories. Because stuff that's going to make me burn more calories, yeah, is going to, by definition, is a threat to life, right? And guess what burns more calories? Complex information. So the amygdala is constantly scanning 7 times a second in a world of diminishing trust and in a context where we're all trying to write the ideal story for our life. It's constantly trying to filter out complex, risky information and threats to what I'm trying to do. That's what's happening every time you're trying to influence anyone. Your wife, a prospect, your husband, partner, a colleague. That is the nature of what's going on inside human communication. Does that make sense? I know I'm moving a bit quickly, but you're still tracking with me? Yeah, we all right? Not too many beers? Okay? Right. So given those, here's the key thing, and some of you have heard me talk about this before, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper tonight. Here's the key thing out of, I think, all of that insight. What does all of this boil down to, Sean? All right, let me say. What it means is that when we talk and try and influence, you cannot be the hero of your story. You must position yourself as the guide. Because here's the thing. If everyone really cares about their own story, which they do, if everyone has an idea as to what it looks like for them to be the hero, heroes don't need other heroes. And you'll see this in films and in literature. What happens is 2 heroes will come along, they'll meet each other, and they'll explain each other's quest, and they'll say, well, thank you very much, it was very nice to meet you, but this is my quest, and thank you very much, it was very nice to meet you, this was my quest. But if you could step aside, because I really need a guide. Because Luke always needs an Obi-Wan. Katniss can't get out the Hunger Games without a Haymitch. Yeah? Frodo needs Gandalf to get to Mordor and back. Heroes need guides. And if the people that you're trying to influence want to be the hero, who do you need to be? The guide. So how you communicate and how you tell stories and how you influence has to be completely guide-centric. All right? Well, what does that look like in practice, Sean? I think I might be getting the idea, but what does that look like? All right, okay, I'm glad you asked. Okay, 2 keys to being an effective guide. Why does Frodo accept Gandalf as a guide? 2 things. Number 1 is he really understands what Frodo wants to do. Yeah, he understands that, he's got to get the ring to Mount Doom, chuck it in, and then get back and save the Shire. And Gandalf gives a shit about that quest. He's got empathy. He understands Frodo's world, and he really cares about it. That's empathy. And he's got a kick-ass bag of spells and a massive staff. That's authority. He's got the capability to help. But Frodo only accepts Gandalf as the guide because he has both. And he demonstrates both in all of his communication. And that's what we as influencers need to do to position ourselves as the guide, is show up with both empathy and authority. You can do that, I would say, best through stories, okay, through telling stories. And here's 5 things why stories are really key, okay. Good stories matter because from what we know in the science, when you tell a story, there's a weird thing where the same parts of your brain that are lighting up, if someone's listening to your story, the exact same parts of their brain are lighting up. If you're telling a story about running a marathon, the part of the brain that controls most motor skills is firing like Christmas in both of your minds. Yeah? It's a literal mind meld when you kind of share a story in a way that talking through data or charts or diagrams or models or making promises just doesn't affect. Yeah? There's a weird mind meld going on. And because of that, it transports the listener into an experience. So they're not just receiving information anymore, they're actually living something. Yeah? And because they're living something, it actually provokes an emotional experience. And if you can control that or shape that, most of us hopefully have heard that we buy with emotion and justify with logic. Have you heard that before? Right? That's totally true. That's how we make buying decisions. Yeah? We buy with emotion because we feel safe making that purchase. It's a feeling of safety and trust. Yeah? But then we justify later with logic. So if you can craft an emotional experience where someone feels safe and feels trust, that's what makes you effective. And then they justify it with logic later. Stories cater to the human need to generalize. What does that mean? If you tell a great story to somebody and it really resonates with an experience that they're going through, they will generalize what you've just said and say, oh, that sounds just like me. Yeah? Because we're constantly kind of trying to filter out all the noise and saying, oh yeah, that person gets me, or not. And a story can help you connect to someone in a way that helps them generalize, oh, I need that person in my world. And then the 5th thing, it's a very natural way to position yourself as the guide. Okay, I've laid a bit of a practical, the abstract framework of the idea. Let's get practical. There are 3 stories that anyone who's into influencing needs to have in their arsenal if you're going to be compelling, okay? And the key reference point for this is if you want to actually get into the book, there's a great book called What Great Salespeople Do. And it's written by the 2 guys that created solution selling. Now, solution selling, if you were working in a blue chip in America in the 90s and noughties, you got trained in solution selling. It was like the gold standard, yeah, for like how sales is done. Problem was, the guys that invented that methodology got to about the end of the mid-noughties and went, do you know what? What we've created doesn't work. Oops. And we've made millions from it because all we've done is we've helped the very best get a little bit better. But everybody else is still languishing that's been through our programs. So actually, what do the best salespeople do? And they went back through the data, and then bravely they wrote this book that says, sorry world, we got it wrong, solution selling shit. Actually, the best people tell stories. And they use story in how they influence. And what they would say, and what I agree with, and what I've shaped the last few years around, is that you need to have at minimum 3 critical stories to have in your arsenal. Here they are. The who am I story, you need the who I represent story, and the who we've helped story. These are the 3 key stories that every salesperson, owner, influencer, freelancer, I think, needs in their arsenal. Okay, let's go through them one by one. But there's a few traps to watch out with, because it's not just the fact that you need these stories. You need to avoid the traps of stories that go on too long. Who likes a story that goes on too long and rambles? Yeah, nobody. Okay, is irrelevant, doesn't connect to really what I'm after. Yeah, or is unremarkable. Okay, and that's, I mean, me and Katie talk about this a lot, right? This is the thing that does my head in about our industry sometimes. We're meant to be the frigging creative industry, and so much of what we do, particularly when we're selling, is unremarkable. We don't really take those kind of risks. Yeah? And how many presentations do you go to and sit through, and actually it's kind of a bit samey and a bit standard, and you don't really remember much from it? So how do you tell a good story? All right? You need to follow a simple story arc. Okay, if anyone's ever done any study about stories, this will be familiar to you, okay? But for those of you who haven't, let me kind of take you through it. Here's how a simple story arc works, okay? And you'll see this in adverts, in films, in books, in marketing, in all kinds of storytelling, right? A simple story arc works like this. You have a setting, a complication, and a resolution. Or sometimes I train it out by saying you have the setup, the twist, and the so what, okay? And the setting would look like something where you'd say, you'd set it up, you'd introduce it, you'd introduce the complication, the little twisty bit, the thing that grabs some interest. Filmmakers will talk about the inciting event. Yeah? And then there's the resolution. Okay, so how did that all work out? And then if you're elegant about how you've done it, the story will extend into either a conscious or a subconscious invitation, yeah, to continue the conversation. Now, what does that look like in practice? I'll flick through these. On the Who Am I story, all right, you've seen a Who Am I story tonight. Whose have you seen? You've seen a version of mine, okay? Because now I had the luxury of giving you the 3-minute version of that story. But there's a 15-second and a 30-second and then 1 minute. But because I had the stage, I just thought, you know what, I'll give you the 3-minute version, all right? But the Who Am I story went like this, okay? There was a setup, okay? So I was talking about Newcastle. I was taking you to a place that was quite cold, yeah, and threatening. I was talking about the fact that I was a doorman, yeah, and there was this little joke about conflict resolution in there, okay? And then there's the twist. It's like, yeah, but I wasn't happy with that. I wanted to take a risk and do something different, so I took a risk and left. Which leaves you hanging, okay, so what happened next? Where did that go? And why is this relevant? I'm curious. Okay, that's the complication. And the resolution was that, throughout it all, I was kind of failing, learning, kind of understanding decision-making, and ultimately kind of getting to a through line of, throughout it all, whether it was being a doorman, whether it was being in the corporate setting, whether it was whatever, actually what I really learned is that stories really matter. Yeah? That was my Who Am I story. And the invitation was to kind of set up the material that was to come next. Okay? That was my Who Am I story. You might not have liked it, but that's what it was. Okay? All right, now the Who I Represent story. Now this is really important. The Who I Represent story is about your company, the company that you represent, okay? Because that's different to you, okay? The you story should be personal. It should create a personal connection with someone to foster trust, okay? The Who You Represent story is different. It's about the company, okay? So, if somebody would say to us, okay, so tell us about Form, what do you guys do? So I understand who you are, Sean, but what does Form do? Yeah? I might say something, well, do you know what? There's a bit of a team of us, and we've all been part of growing and scaling successful creative businesses. And what we find is we work with a lot of creative leaders who, for whatever reason, just butt up against problems in growing a business the way they really want to grow. Yeah, so we've got 3 ways as to how we do that. All right? That's not a chronological classic boy met girl, boy married girl, lived happily ever after. It's not a chronological story, but it's a thematic story with the setup of, we find ourselves working with. That's the setup. You kind of visualize that in your brain, yeah? Of, okay, so that they're a team that have done this and they work with these kind of leaders. The complication was, that folks struggle to grow in a way that really feels right for them. And the resolution is there's 3 main ways that we do that, which extends into the invitation. Well, you could take the conversation wherever you like. Yeah? Well, it's interesting, 3 ways. Well, tell me about one of them. Okay, so there's a team of you. Who else is in the team? I don't care really where the conversation goes, but there's an invitation to keep going deeper. Does that make sense? Yeah? Now, can you imagine if you've got like a couple of versions of that story for your brand? Yeah, so if you're I can never say prolific north. Can I just call it P&L? Yeah? So if you're at P&L next week, right? I don't know why, I just can't say it. If you're at P&L next week, and you've got a couple of those in your back pocket, it's far more elegant than when someone says, oh, tell me what you do. It's like, oh, well, it's kind of complicated. We've been around for a while, and we've got this offer, and there's 7 service lines, and we've got... You know, it's kind of like the verbal vomit over somebody, right? But a couple of nice, tight, who I represent stories, yeah, come across as you position yourself and your brand as the guide. The last one, very quickly, who we've helped. These are really powerful. So I'm not going to tell my story because I don't feel too much like a sales pitch. Let me tell you a different one. So I was with a guy a couple of weeks ago who I wanted to get in on a partnership with a different client to do some innovation stuff. And I was asking him to tell me about what he did. But he gave me the verbal version of a really crap stock photo, right? He was just going through like, you know, oh, well, we have this 4-stage process, and, you know, there's an ideation thing here. And I'm like, ideation's not a word, stop it, right? And he's just giving me all this fluff, right? But actually, I'd heard he'd done some really good work, and he was a really good guy. So I wanted to give him the opportunity to really land it with us. So I almost teed him up. I put the golf ball on the tee for him, and I was like, tell me about where that's worked, yeah? And he said to me, I'll tell you, do you like tuna? I was like, I do, actually. He said, okay, well, it's really interesting because tuna's a bit Marmite. People love it or hate it, right? So John West come to us and they say, for people who like tuna, we want to help them eat more because we can't convince people that don't like tuna to like tuna. We've tried, it just doesn't work, yeah? Yeah, but people who do like tuna, we could want to get them to eat more. Can you help us innovate our tuna line? And he said, yes, we can. And we went through a bit of a process and we figured out, okay, the main problem with tuna is that you've always got to bring something to it. Yeah? You open a can of tuna and just, you can't eat it as it is, can you? You've got to bring like some mayonnaise or some chili or some oil or, you know, you've got to bring something to it. Okay? What if we created something where actually that friction is removed? Okay, and we helped John West create tuna-like lunches and kind of the infusions, that kind of thing. I'm like, brilliant. Yeah? And I'm like, that's fantastic. That's the who I've helped story. That's the classic, okay, there was the setup of, do you like tuna? Yeah, the complication of, but there's a problem with tuna, isn't there? Yeah? And then there's the resolution of, and we went through this 3-step, that's so much better then. Let me tell you about a 4-step innovation process with loads of insight. And the who we've helped story is enormously powerful. Yeah? So, there should be a handout, which, John, I think you're going to pass around for a second. So I know that's hard in a really short amount of time, but even if you've just scratched out a couple of words, one of the best things I ever did, that mentor that I mentioned to me when I had in my late 20s, like, because we were always away in hotels and consultancy, and she was like, don't waste that time. If you've got like time on a train or if you've got time in a hotel or something like that, think about how you're going to craft intentional stories all the time, right? So the next time that you've got a train journey or you're staying overnight in a hotel, I've got a notebook filled with these kind of things now because I've just been doing it for that long. Yeah? And it's worth kind of incorporating into your practice as an influencer, what's my story bank? And importantly, what's the story bank that we have as a business? Because the folk that represent your brand and go out there and try and work with clients and, you know, pitch to other folk, they need compelling stories too. And it's your job as a leader to help them, okay? So I wanted to give you that as a framework to take away. As I say, you're going to get all the slides. To really equip your teams and kind of say, you know, take an afternoon, take a couple of hours, and say, let's brainstorm what are some of our really good stories. How do we tell the who am I, the who I represent, and the who I've helped stories? Yeah? And listen, if you forget everything else, because I know I've chucked a lot out yet, here's 4 things to just remember. Number 1, stories influence like nothing else. All right? They just do. You can't fight the science on this anymore. Yeah? Telling good stories is not just about being a raconteur, yeah, or kind of having a good presence. Actually, stories is just how we communicate. It's just whether you're good or bad at it, right? So really try and master how you influence through stories. Empathy and authority. Too many of us feel the pressure to establish authority because we've been told for so long, yeah, but you need to be credible. So you need to have case studies and talk about how you're the best in the world and the #1 app developer. Nobody cares. Nobody cares until they know that you care and that you've got empathy. So you need to have empathy and authority to influence. It's not enough just to show up with authority anymore. Yeah, it puts people off because it comes across as you being the hero. Yeah, try the 3 stories with the story arc. Have a go. Yeah, try and shape some nice, succinct, different versions of the 3 that we talked about. And number 4, take some risks, make them compelling. Yeah, talk about the fact that someone shot you a look like you were about to vomit on her kids. Okay, like throw in some little creative vignettes. Yeah, just to help you be memorable. Because I think that's the greatest crime, is that when we're selling or when we're presenting or when we're influencing, is that we hold ourselves back. One of the things that we do, which I want to talk about very quickly, because it'd be disingenuous for me to talk about sales and then not try and put something in front of you. Yeah, we take folk on study trips. Okay, 2 years ago we went to Copenhagen. So this was at the Us2 studio out in Malmo, and when we were out there, we had a presentation from this Danish lady. And she was like, you Brits are so fucking reserved. And she was proper, like the air was blue, right? She was like, we get the Yanks coming over and they're crap. And what you do is so much better, but you don't talk about it enough. And it was a real wake-up call to the 14 leaders that we had out there, that it was like, actually, we need to be a bit bolder and more creative in how we sell what we do, right? Now, as I say, we do this every year where we take people on a bit of a study trip. Paul's coming with us to Amsterdam in a couple of weeks. Where are you, Paul? You there? Okay. And we've got 2 slots left for that. Say again? Business trip, yes. 3 days in Amsterdam. I'm not going to be there, but John is. So John over there, just give everyone a wave, John. So John's coordinating that. So as I say, there's only ever 12 spots because we like to make it nice and intimate. It's a 3-day study trip where we're going to see some of the best creative studios that are in Europe. As I say, last year we were in Berlin, 2 years Copenhagen. This year we're going to Amsterdam. If that would be of interest to you, have a quick chat with John. The second thing, just for you to consider, is I do a full day workshop on this. All right, we've kind of obviously just touched a little bit on how to tell better stories. But if you and your team really wanted to kind of go deep and go, actually, do you know what? Our marketing is shit compared to what it should be. Yeah, and we really need to kind of rethink about how we position ourselves as the guide through our websites, through our sales campaigns, through our email copy. It bleeds into everything. If that's of interest to you, have a chat to me, and we'll talk about story selling. That's our one-day workshop for that. Hope that's been helpful. Hope that's been useful. I think we're going to go into a break now. Is that right?
We're just running a little bit behind, but if you've got questions for Sean, just feel free to approach him during the break.
Try not to cough on you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sean.
All right, thank you.